So welcome once again to Flawed Masterpieces. This is the online version. We're also meeting in person each Sunday. I'm Bryan Eckelmann. I get to teach at both those times. And I'm so grateful to you, dear, that you're joining me so that this online experience is a discussion. And we're going to do that some of the time on campus as well. But right now, I get this privilege here upstairs of our house at our desk.
And I'm Kimberly.
And this is Kimberly. And especially today, we're going to talk about a woman of valor and wisdom and faith. Flawed Masterpieces, remember, is about the unlikely hero that is in all of us. And so we're going to look now at 1 Samuel 25, and we'll begin with the second verse. We invite you to follow along. It's a long story. In fact, if you are watching online, if you have the ability to stop right now, read the entire chapter through, that might help you. Otherwise, just hang with us. 2 through 11. You want to read that for us, dear?
Sure. A certain man in Maon, who had property there at Carmel, was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband, a Calebite, was surly and mean in his dealings. While David was in the desert, he heard, that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear it's sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, they'll tell you. Therefore, be favorable toward my young men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you find for them.' When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name, and then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?'"
So, yes, this is kind of a setup for me, I think. Really smart wife, really mean, dumb husband, and we'll go from there. Kimberly, tell us what these names mean. Obviously, we have David. This is King David.
Yes.
But it's David before he takes his throne. He is anointed as king, but he is not yet on the throne. So he is running for his life in the midst of a very bad desert in Judea, which is basically Masada, if you know that area. And that's what we're talking about here, the desert of Maon.
Okay.
So the names of Nabal and
So we
Abigail.
have two main characters besides David. We have Nabal, whose name means fool or foolish one. Kind of hard to be named foolish one, but he lives up to it. And then we have Abigail, whose name means joy of her father, or for her father's joy. So Abba being father.
How is Abigail insignificant? We're talking about the unlikely heroes in all of us. She is an unlikely person of impact.
Well, I'll tell you what, Brian. Our unlikely hero, Isla, is downstairs barking. Can you shut the door and I'll explain this? Okay. She's
Once
teaching
again,
us.
the dog gets in the way of the study.
Well, Abigail was a woman in an age where women did not have any overt power. And whatever control she had over her life and the life of her husband and her servants was behind the scenes, so to speak. She was clearly the delight of her father, but she ends up married to a person who is anything but delightful. She is called a woman of good understanding in some translations, or tov, good understanding. Interesting thing is that same phrase is used to talk about the prophet Samuel, who has just died in our story. So she's given a description that's quite favorable and in parallel to that of the prophet. And we'll see that she actually is a prophet in her own right later.
Mm-hmm. And so from that, each one of us has impact, but our impact does not come from wealth or power or status nearly as much as it comes from the ability for God to be able to use us.
And in circumstances she did not think that morning, I'm going to have an opportunity to be used of God.
Yeah. Here's the question that so many will ask. David and his men seem pretty presumptive here. They basically say, hey, we have provided protection for you. We haven't robbed you, so give us your stuff. It sounds like they're almost like enforcers in old style, downtowns where the mafia was or something. Mm-hmm. How is this a reasonable request, or is it a reasonable request?
It is in a sense because it's part of that culture. It's considered reasonable that when someone provides a service to you, even if you don't ask them for it, you reciprocate by providing a service. And so David's servants are saying, hey, we took care of your sheep. You hadn't even asked us. We made sure your sheep were safe. Now that you're shearing in a time of celebration, share some of that celebration with us.
So there's two issues there. One is that David and his men are actually protecting. Remember, this is desert. This is not a farming environment where everybody is providing everything for themselves. The sheep and the goats and the livestock are just roaming a fair ways because there's so little to eat, and therefore it's very dangerous. And so to have someone protecting and not harming your flock was not something as simple as not trespassing on your yard. It was basically taking care of the whole region. So David's group was something of a citizen police force, if you will.
And it was just wise. It was wise if Nabal chose to cultivate this. But instead of being wise, he chooses to be a fool.
Right.
And in being a fool, as we read later on, he jeopardizes his whole household.
Well, and the other part we need to realize is that David was the anointed one. Mm-hmm. He was king in waiting, if not king already. And Nabal, therefore, he had a right to a portion of Nabal's crop, if you will, his profits. Nabal sees nothing of that. Who is this David? He's insolent, as well as not very wise here.
Yeah, he's offensive to him.
And so David blows his stack, basically, is the next part.
David
read a portion of it, whatever kind of makes sense there.
David's men turned around, went back, and when they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, put on your swords. So they put on their swords, and David put on his. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed behind with supplies.
So David is furious, and it sounds like he's vindictive. We're going to get to the fact that that's probably not wise. Now Abigail comes into the story.
Mm-hmm. When one of the servants told Nabal's wife, Abigail, David sent messengers from the desert to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us all the time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He's such a wicked man that no one can talk to him.
So this gives us some background, and once again, smart lady, dumb dude, and
smart servant too.
Smart servant to tell Abigail, and it really does describe a little more why David would deserve a portion of this. He and his men have actually been very good. So deserve isn't the right word, but at least should, out of kindness and gratitude for the free gift that they have offered. And it says Abigail then lost, I'm looking on your thing, she lost no time. She takes a whole bunch of things, loaded them on a donkey, and brings them she did not tell her husband, and brings them to David. And verse 21, why don't you read from
David
there?
had just said, "It's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property in the desert so that nothing of his was missing. He's paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David be ever so severely if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him."
So David really has lost his temper and probably lost his judgment. You know, the interesting thing of this, and it's an important thing for all of us to know as we read biblical stories, and that is when the Bible says something is done by a Bible hero, in this case David, it doesn't mean that it's recommending that behavior to us. It's telling us that David reacted this way. It's not telling us that that reaction is necessary, good, or wise, or godly. That's an important thing to remember. The only one that we can look to and say, I want to do everything that one did, is the character Jesus. After that, we're really left, sometimes they just tell us the story. They don't comment whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, they're not saying. But it's interesting, Brian, if you look at this story, something which I just noticed while you were talking is, it's right in the middle of two other stories where David uses good judgment and actually spares the life of Saul. So you get chapter 24 where he's sparing Saul's life, this story, and then chapter 26 where he spares. So this one time he just loses his cool, and Abigail rides up.
By the way, I think this is a good description. We'll apply this to ourselves. You know, sometimes in your marriage, I know in ours as well, one person in the marriage is being foolish and one person in the marriage is being wise at that particular moment. And that's why the two together are so helpful.
Oh, yeah.
And I have been rescued so often by your smarts and... well, thank you. I wasn't going to put it that way, but I'm glad you did. Because I think that's the case sometimes. And also, there's the privilege of teaming up. And in the end, this is a story of teaming up, and we'll get to that in a moment. Why don't you keep going?
Abigail sees David. She quickly gets off her donkey. She bows down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "My Lord, let the blame be on me alone. Please let your servant speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. May the Lord pay no attention to that wicked man Nabal. He's just like his name. His name is Fool, and folly goes with him. But as for me, your servant, I did not see the man my master sent. Now, since the Lord has kept you, my master, from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, may your enemies and all who intend to harm my master be like Nabal. And let this gift, which is the food she brought, which your servant has brought to my master, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's offense, for the Lord will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my master, because he fights the Lord's battles. Let no wrongdoing be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my master will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. When the Lord has done for my master every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him leader over Israel, my master will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. And when the Lord has brought my master success, remember your servant."
This lady is smart.
Well,
she has a lot of qualities that she's teaching us here. And what are those qualities?
I think it goes beyond smart, Brian.
Yes, I agree.
I think she's inspired by the Lord.
Okay, so she has faith.
She has faith. She has knowledge that the Spirit of God has given her, too. She knows she's considered a prophet, and she knows what is to come true for David.
So who considers her a prophet?
Well, she's considered a prophet in the Talmud, in the commentaries that are collected by the Hebrew scholars, they list 7 female prophets in the
Folks,
Old Testament.
Folks, I honestly did not know this.
One of
so I'm
them
really
is
asking
Abigail, because Abigail has insight into the preservation of David's life in terms of the destruction of David's enemies, which we'll see happen very quickly after this, and that he needs to be above vengeance.
So I didn't know that about the Talmud, again, as Timberly just mentioned, which is a commentary on the Old Testament written by Jewish scholars a few hundred years before the time of Christ and right up to the time of Christ. So that's something that they see, and they see it from this passage that you just read.
She uses prophetic
the Lord
language.
is going to do this. And when she says my master, she means David, by the way. Yes, she talks about her husband at times, but she's being very polite to David in contrast to what Nabal has said.
And she asks that he would be remembered. She would be remembered by David when the Lord brings David success. So she is absolutely staking the future of her household on David. She doesn't actually subvert her husband.
Right.
She knows if she went straight to her husband, he's probably drinking and in the cups at this point. We see later on that was a problem for him. But she just chooses to take matters into her own hands. But she does it to preserve her household, to protect her household. She knows that her husband's made a foolish error, and that David's about to make an even more foolish error in striking out in vengeance and killing every male in the household. So by her bringing food to David, out the back door on the sly, kind of, and asking his forgiveness and reminding him of who he is as the Lord's anointed, she's actually acting in the best interest of her home.
So she's teaching us a bunch of things. She's teaching us faith. She has faith in what God has yet to bring about in David's life. And that's why she's considered a prophet, perhaps. But she certainly sees beyond the physical of what's going on because of God's promises to David. She knows that. She's smart. She really is smart in how she does things. She's tactful in how she deals with Nabal. She doesn't tell Nabal in advance. She doesn't contradict Nabal because he hasn't told her no and things like that. She hasn't asked for permission, therefore she hasn't gotten.
And she might suffer greatly for what she does.
She might suffer greatly, but she's also
brave.
Incredibly tactful to David in how she speaks. And how she speaks about his future, and how she tells this. She's also courageous.
Yeah, very brave.
And we've seen already in a couple of the other studies that we've had that courage go hand in hand with faith. And people talk about, oh, I have faith, but I'm just very timid about the future. It doesn't quite make sense most of the time to do that. If we have faith in the one who owns the future, we should be courageous about the future. And she is here. That's pretty amazing.
Well, how does David respond to her? Read on 32.
Okay, I'll read that.
Part.
And yes, I have the same, but it's just thinner. So David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment in keeping me from bloodshed this day, from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, surely as the Lord lives, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, I would have come quickly to meet you. I would have basically killed everybody. I have heard your words and granted your request. Go home in peace." David basically repents. I think he's saying here, you're right.
You saved me from
you saved me from myself, and you also turned me to praising God.
Well, that's the best anybody can do.
And again, this is the power of two people working together and being one as smart as the other and one as faithful as the other. And just recognizing that there are times when we just have bad days and things hit us really wrong. And we make wrong decisions. And somebody else to just kind of time out,
pull us back from the precipice.
Makes a difference.
Okay, so David says, great, go home in peace. So Abigail.
And let me just finish this myself.
Yeah, please.
Abigail then goes back, and after her husband gets drunk and sobers up the next day, so he's kind of gotten the vim and vigor out of his system, as it were. She then waits till then to tell him, hey, David was going to come. He was going to kill you. He brought 400 men. You were dead man walking. I went to him. I saved the situation. David's okay. He's not coming. Nabal is so terrified that either he has a heart attack or something happens and the Lord judges him. Either way, Nabal basically stops and can hardly speak, is very nervous, and 10 days later, I believe,
it says
dies.
The Lord struck Nabal and he died. The scriptures make it very clear it was a direct action of the Lord.
It was a direct action of the Lord, and it came in quick result of Abigail speaking to him as well, and him being terrified. And then David finds out, doesn't say how long afterwards, David finds out that Nabal is dead and basically proposes to Abigail. She says yes, and she ends up becoming David's third wife, though his first wife has been taken from him by King Saul, because King Saul's daughter, Michal, married David, and King Saul said, no, I'm annulling that marriage. I'm giving Michal to someone else.
Yeah, she was actually his second wife.
And so she's pulled back.
Michal was his second wife.
Really?
Paltiel was his first wife. And he takes Michal and gives her to another man who's more faithful to him.
Right.
So anyway, the Lord replaces.
First of all, we're not going to get into, this is not a Bible study about David's multiple wives and whether that's wisdom or not. Let's not go there for today. And so we can tackle that later. But David has been spared from his own testosterone, as it were. And this woman, Abigail, becomes a wife, and we would assume an advisor to David in the days ahead. And what does she teach us, Timberly?
Well, let's not forget that when she marries David, she also brings that significant wealth to David. So it was a marriage not only of value for her wisdom and her beauty, but also it was a pretty savvy thing to do, to ally himself with this family of great wealth and to bring the power into his own camp. Are
we told that? Because sometimes that death would send the wealth to the next brother.
We are told that we're not told that explicitly.
But we can assume that might happen.
And there are no children listed for Abigail and Nabal. And frankly, if I were the brother, I wouldn't raise much of a ruckus against David at this point with his 600
So we
men.
can guess that maybe David got some financial dowry out of this significant.
Some sheep and goats.
But what does Abigail teach us?
Well, Abigail,
about this?
And I'm going off on tangents, I'm sorry, honey.
That's
Abigail teaches us a couple things. One, she teaches us that you can be in a pretty horrendous situation and a pretty insignificant situation, and God can still use you.
Amen.
She was pretty powerless and living with a fool one day, and the next day God's using her strategically to save a whole household and to save the future king from great sin.
I think there's also in this story a kind of a reminder to wait. David gets angry and he's ready, and he straps on his sword and he's getting ready to go right away. Abigail convinces him to wait, to do something else. Abigail waits before she tells Nabal. And then Nabal makes this decision, is saved by his wife, and then David, Abigail have to wait. 10 days later, he dies. Not right away, later. And so God is in charge of the timing of things. And
true.
Patience for us is something that seems to be in the story as well. That's digging pretty deep.
Yeah,
but
it's good,
certainly wisdom, tact, and faith are a potent trifecta in Abigail's life. And there's something that we can pray for the days ahead.
Amen.
And so we invite you to take that and think about that for your own life this week. Next week, come on back. We'll have another Flawed Masterpieces. God bless you. We'll see you then.